By the muscular golden arse of innocence. What?
Officer, I got one question for you. What are those?
Gotcha.
Hey, how's it going? It's me, Vashthalas. Thanks for tuning in. I'm currently level 96 on my Assassin League starter. It's been a wild roller coaster of a league start, but here we are. I'm ready to share everything I know about the build with you in this Endgame Poison Manaforged Assassin update. So, before I go over what this video will entail, I want to let you know what the build is specifically for. So, it's not a bosser. You're not going to be doing Ubers with this. You'll be able to get your Void Stones and you'll be able to do regular bosses pretty comfortably. But you won't be able to do like Delve bosses, I'm pretty sure. Maybe. I haven't done it yet myself. I'm not really targeting Delve. You won't be able to do Abyss bosses perfectly because of the physical damage that's involved. I've died randomly a couple of times whenever I thought that I wouldn't, so I just want to be upfront about what content is potentially dangerous for this. But what the build is specifically for is Big Boom Expedition farming, Eater of Worlds altar farming, and then a little bit of harvest on the side. So those three things are what I've been planning this entire build around. It's what I've used to fund it, and it's what I'm probably going to continue to farm on it as I start hoarding my currency, planning my trajectory for the next build I want to try out. Probably accuracy stacking Juggernaut or something with those new claws. I don't know 100% yet what I want to jump over to, but I'm pretty sure this build is nearing the end of its tenure, as at level 96 there's only so few changes that I could continue to make. Now then, that was a huge digression, sorry. I would like to go over what the video is going to include. I'm going to go over the POB. There's a couple of drop-down sections now, instead of just a raw template that I've been giving you in the last few updates. I'll go over some stepping stone unique items that I would recommend on your way to acquiring those more expensive building blocks that I'll be talking about as updates this time around. I'm going to go over my gear. I'm going to go over the skills again. I'll go over the Grafts for once. I keep forgetting to go over the Grafts. I can't believe I haven't talked about those once yet, but definitely going to go over those now that the build is nearly complete. There's still some things to be optimized. I won't beat around the bush, but it's at the point of, do you really want to keep investing, or do you want to jump over to something that's going to tackle the end game more comfortably and more uniformly, right? Like, Big Boom Expedition is a great source of currency, but we want to be doing tier 17s. We want to be doing those Uber bosses because that's where the real currency is at right now. And I think this is a great league starter. I've probably overinvested a little bit. And let's go ahead and get started talking about it. First, I want to talk to you about the Atlas strategy. This is the Atlas strategy that I have used by and large for the entire league start so far. I've been fiddling around with a couple of other trees, but they didn't feel nearly as good. And some of the other strategies are just a little too investment intensive for my tastes. I prefer an alch and go kind of a strategy. So this is a very relaxing strategy if you ask me. Besides that you're doing Big Boom Expedition, you're not going to be able to do this on any other build that isn't poison or ailment of some kind that can ignore a lot of the modifiers that Big Boom introduces to your maps. So, mounting modifiers. Increased effect of explicit modifiers on your maps. We want more scarabs. We want harvest. You don't have to do harvest. You can cut out harvest if you want, but I think that it's a very nice side gig, especially whenever you guarantee it with Call of the Grove. Bumper crop, bountiful harvest, crop rotation, big boom, get all the good nodes for expedition, pick up singular focus. We want the small nodes that give increased quality of life force, Eldritch Gaze, rampant growth for Eater of Worlds, more expedition support for Danig and Tujin. Those are the vendors that we want. We are pathing our last points towards the increased pack size of Eater of Worlds. And then we're probably going to fill out the top hat, which if you don't know what the top hat is, it's just these increased effective explicit modifiers along the top side of the Atlas tree. Pick up the quantity wheel, pick up the rarity wheel after going through Heart of the Grove. More expedition support through Buried Knowledge. We want our rare monsters to have increased effective dropping scarabs. If you don't want to do harvest, you could instead use this scarab, if I can find it. Horn Scarab of the Nemesis. This will give those rare monsters that were spawning through Expedition 2 additional modifiers, make them much more likely to drop scarabs. That'd be pretty good, I imagine. I haven't tried it out myself. Like I said, I prefer minimal investment and kind of relaxing gameplay versus I need to min-max my setup at every single step of the way, and I don't know. Like I said, I'm kind of just throwing paint at a wall with this Atlas strategy. It's not really that min-maxed. But it's worked out. It helped me fund the build. That's pretty much all there is to it. Chiseled Perfection for more increased effect of those explicit modifiers. We want the unlikely scarabs. We want more rewarding monster packs. Pretty simple. I might give the Horn Scarab of the Nemesis a try once I start stream tonight. See how that feels instead of doing Harvest as a side gig. Maybe those points could be better spent elsewhere. Blocking other scarabs, maybe. That could be a good strategy instead of splitting our focus between Expedition and Harvest. But that's pretty much the Atlas strategy. For the mapping strategy, I don't have them all unlocked yet, sorry. I'm using Cemetery and Castle Ruins. You'll want all of your favorite maps to be Cemetery, and then only one will be Castle Ruins. And the reason this works out is because Castle Ruins will be the fallback map for Cemetery, which is the one that you actually want to farm. But Castle Ruins is still a pretty good map. It comes with the level 3 Enlighten Divination card, and I imagine that's going to be worth a good amount if you can put those together regularly. The Cemetery comes with Deafening Essence. Well, yeah, it doesn't really come with anything at all. I thought that this came with better results. So, in all honesty, before you start the Cemetery and Castle Ruins loop, I would recommend farming Grave Trowel until the Nameless Seer shows up. It could be Grave Trowel, it could be the Corrupted Cathedral or whatever it is that drops the Mage Blood. I don't know where it is right now on. Yeah, you could Nameless Seer scry this map over to the Cemetery. But ultimately, the divination cards for Cemetery off the bat aren't that great, so you would want to swap one of the more valuable map's divination cards over to it. But I think you do want to run Cemetery and Castle Ruins because of their open layout. It makes doing Big Boom Expedition super, super comfy. Again, as comfy as Big Boom Expedition can actually be, it's pretty hectic. I almost forgot to talk to you guys about the scarabs that I use for this mapping strategy. Now, I use 2 Expedition Scarabs of Rune Finding to increase the amount of runic monster markers. Use Expedition Scarab of Archaeology to increase the amount of suffixes and prefixes on the remnants. Expedition Scarab to spawn it. And then if you want to do Harvest on the side like I do, just throw in a Harvest Scarab of Doubling. You'll make your currency back no problem every single map. To the wind with it, you don't even have to think about it. Just go in and do the Sacred Grove every time. If you don't want to do the Sacred Grove and you want to invest a little bit further into expedition strategy as like the solo thing that you're doing, I would recommend Horned Scarab of the Nemesis. This will add 2 additional modifiers to the rare monsters of your maps, and I'm pretty sure it will also apply to the expedition monsters that you spawn through that big boom. They've got all those other remnant modifiers on top of them, and with our Atlas strategy, the rare monsters have 50% increased chance to drop a scarab for each modifier affecting them. And I could definitely see Horned Scarab of the Nemesis popping off a little bit. Another one that could be a potentially good scarab to use would be a cartography scarab, maybe? Where is it? Is this it? No. Maybe it is. I don't know. You could try out like a cartography strategy with Expedition. I'm not sure it would be better than, say, a cartography abyss strategy. And I know I said earlier that abyss was kind of like sus in terms of the bossing angle, but for the actual abysses themselves and the Stygian spires, those are no problem for us. I should have emphasized that earlier. You can do abyss strategies if you want. It's just the boss that is a little dicey due to our physical mitigation. But those are the scarabs. Those are the scarabs that I would recommend. Either fully invested on expedition with a harvest scarab of doubling on the side, or fully invest in expedition with a horned scarab of the nemesis on the side. Yep, that's about all I can say for the Atlas strategy. Let me talk to you about the Ascendancy real quick, as it will help contextualize things further ahead in the video that I need to talk to you about. So first Ascendancy is Toxic Delivery, second is Infused Toxins, third Shadowed Blood, and then the fourth is Mistwalker. But once you get the Breachlord Bloodline, I decided to go with the Otherworldly Appendages. I think it's up to you whether or not you want to take less physical and fire damage due to the Grafts that I'm going to talk to you about in just a moment, or if you want the ability to be a little bit faster and the chance to avoid damage altogether. I think it's kind of a tough choice. The Grafts aren't going to make you take less damage across the board, but it will help us address some of the biggest problem damage types facing our build. So I think I'm going to go with Otherworldly Appendages for this build and say see you later to Mistwalker. So that is the Ascendancy in a nutshell, and onto the gear. Onto the gear, and I want to knock out the Grafts real quick. I'm using a Hardening Ullgraft and a Molten Zothgraft. Probably everyone and their mother is using a Molten Zothgraft for Heart of the Flame. It's basically Molten Shell, but better, because it doesn't come with the requirement of having a lot of armor. The implicit obviously isn't very useful to us because we're not an armor or strength build, but we do have some strength requirements, so one of the modifiers for Molten Zothgraft comes in a lot of handy. It's the plus to strength. We need that from somewhere, and the Molten Zothgraft I think is a great place for it. Other mods that you'll want are increase Graft Blood Gained for those sweet Wumbo Tree gifts, and there is a suffix for the Molten Zothgraft that makes it very, very expensive, and that is one that gives Heart of the Flame a lot of cooldown reduction. You obviously want Heart of the Flame to have as low of a cooldown as possible. I think it goes up to like 70% cooldown reduction on that suffix, which is crazy. But it's really expensive. I heard someone bought one for like 20 Divine Orbs, so I wouldn't say it is worth investing to that degree. If you like the character and you want to keep exploring it and you want to invest to the max, be my guest. I would highly recommend that suffix, but aim for one just so that you have the plus to strength, and that will help you satisfy the strength requirements of the build on top of the very, very nice defensive lair. Hardening Ullgraft. I am mainly using this for the ability to roll damage over time multiplier as one of those prefixes. And everything else I don't really care about. The physical damage reduction is really useful, but it's mainly for the damage over time. There is also another modifier for this one that is 15 to 20% chance to gain an endurance charge when you've been hit. And I don't think that that is as useful, but it is certainly a defensive flare if you want to try to include that instead of the damage over time multiplier. So, like I said, we are using the Breachlord Ascendancy, right? And because we're using an Graft and a Zoffgraft, that means we take 15% less physical and fire damage. You could try out something different. Say if you didn't want to be a Breachlord and you wanted to stick with the Mistwalker. Instead, I would recommend something that I learned from another content creator. I can't remember their name off the top of my head right now. But shout out to you, mystery content creator. I think it's Spicy Sushi, perhaps. Preserving Stillness. If you apply exposure to an enemy, you get another shield similar to Heart of Flame, just not nearly as powerful, but on a lower cooldown. And it's not that difficult to apply exposure, especially if you put one passive point into the mastery for suppression, inflict fire, cold, and lightning exposure on enemies when you suppress their spell damage. And he also talked about how you could layer that with 90% of maximum life or above mastery, so that Heart of Flame isn't constantly proccing. And between those two shields and the layering of when they activate, it'll make you pretty darn tanky, and I imagine even more so with the avoidance layer of Mistwalker. So give that a try if you don't want to do the otherworldly appendages like I am. Bloodline Ascendancies are new. I was like, I have to do something Bloodline Ascendancy, right? Like, I've got to. It's right here, staring me in the face. Why not? With the Grafts and Ascendancy out of the way, I need to talk to you about the rest of my gear. In my weapon swap, I'm using a Red Blade banner for some Warcry assistance through Enduring Cry, Life Tap support, and Urgent Orders. We have easy access to endurance charges when we feel like we need them. It's a little clunky, but I can't think of any easier way to get endurance charges into the build when we need them. And it also gives us the choice of, do I want these endurance charges or not, as some of the alter modifiers that we'll be choosing will say things like reduced life regeneration per endurance charge. So, just don't use the skill when you've got that modifier selected through the alters. And the claw is basically non-functional. 25% increased Warcry effect, and then the Warcry skill's cooldown time is 4 seconds. I think its cooldown time is normally 8 seconds. So it helps out, right? Like, it definitely helps out in terms of consistency and not requiring you to think as much about the timing of it. Moving on. This is my bow. I got it from the Genesis tree. The one bow tree doth provide. I highly recommend that that's where you get your bow from as well. I'll go over my Genesis tree passives once I'm going over some of the other items and how they're crafted as well. But yeah, Tri-Elemental, damage over time multi, chaos damage over time multi, and for the final suffix, you would want 2 additional arrows, as that will be the best. We want more arrows. More arrows means we have to click less, and it also means more hits are going out. So, yep, it's a pretty expensive bow to make if you want it to be perfect like that. And I would definitely recommend trying to fracture the 2 additional bow attacks. For the quiver, I made this just by spamming essences of woe, and dot multi. The crit chance isn't really useful. You'd probably want accuracy or something else instead, but I didn't want to recraft my quiver, so I decided to solve accuracy through another item slot. Bow attacks, fire, and additional arrow is a highly valued suffix. Increased damage with bow skills. You could go for a double dot multi quiver, but again, that's going to be really expensive and you won't be able to fracture it. So super expensive craft if you want to go that route. I would recommend either a vile arrow quiver or a 2-point arrow quiver, as the 2-point arrow quiver will help you do things like delirium more easily, raising your accuracy and skirting that downside of delirium and what it does to your character. I'm not really sure about the bow base, by the way. I've had like an assassin bow. This is a sniper bow. Just get whatever base you can with the right modifiers. I don't think it's that serious. If you want to min-max, there was this one bow that comes from Heist. I can't really remember what it is, but it comes with a lot of fire damage on it. And I'm pretty sure that that bow is the best to craft on for poison Manaforged arrows. Yep, that's enough about the weapon and quiver. Blizzard Crown! You're gonna spam Essences of Loathing on this for the increased mana reservation of efficiency. You're looking for spell suppression as that other suffix. You want it to be a pretty high tier, and you will craft on the increased duration of ailments you inflict while focused. With the suffixes solved, you'll head over to the bench and lock in those suffixes and reforge for life until you get something good. Ideally, you won't fill in the prefixes and it'll allow you to continue crafting it. I have not finished this craft. I probably won't finish this craft. I just don't want to waste more divine orbs on it just for a little bit more life. But that's what I would do. If I were interested in continuing to invest into this helmet, I would reforge life after locking in those suffixes through the Essences of Loathing. I can't remember if I already mentioned Lightning Coil, but I did in a previous video, and we're still using it. You can get a corrupted one if you want. There's a couple of useful implicits there. We're still using the Foulborn Pandemonious for the physical damage from hits taken as cold. This build back in Affliction League would use Defiance of Destiny. That is so much more expensive than I want to spend on this character. Some of the cheapest ones are like 15 Divine Orbs or something. They're really, really expensive. And it also got nerfed an insane amount compared to its legacy version. So I think Foulborn, the Pandemonious, is a very sensical and budget option for the purposes of this build and how far I plan on taking it. And we're going to be using Sovereignty as that anoint, as it will help us get away from using something like a Venter's Gamble for the increased mana reservation of efficiency skills. For the rings, we're going to use one ring as a rare for resistances and accuracy. You can also craft it with Essences of Delirium, I think, for some dot multi, but that will put a little bit more pressure on your resistances for pretty small damage gain, I would say, and you're probably more interested in the resistances so that you can farm altars more comfortably. Kikazaru! This is our life regeneration. We have such little socket pressure that we can't afford things like Vitality, and we wouldn't be able to fit it in anyways due to our reservations. So Kikazaru, I think, is a staple. Get one with 15 to all attributes. You can get one with a corrupted implicit and solve the resistance loss through that rare ring that I just mentioned a moment ago. And there are some useful implicits like level 23 Despair Curse skill, all to elemental resistances. There's a few. So look through those corrupted implicits if you think a corrupted Kikazaru is for you. The Embalmer. I previously was recommending some Southbound, but they're just some stepping stones. Really try to get any pair of unique gloves with a curse on hit, either Despair or Temp Chains. I think Temp Chains is the better of the two curses, by the way, as it's a defensive layer on top of a damage boost. But ideally, you would want a pair of the Embalmer, as it is poison-centric unique. Increased poison duration is an extremely powerful modifier for our damage. Chaos resistance, which actually ends up being really useful. And then the extra support for one of our Manaforged links. So I got Temp Chains on mine. You don't have to get +1 to max Frenzy Charges. We actually don't use Frenzy Charges in the late game version of the build. That's for altar farming. If you don't want to do altar farming and you want to do something else, be my guest, include the Frenzy Charges, but they're not even really that optimal, the Frenzy Charges. So, I don't know. Include them if you want, but if you're doing what I'm doing, we don't use Frenzy Charges anymore, as it comes with some heavy downsides. For the belt, I just made this, and I failed 9 times. I failed 9 fracturing orbs in order to make this. The 1 in 4 chance. There's literally no RNG to it, I don't think, besides the 1 in 4. So That drove me a little crazy. Minus 4,000 Chaos Orbs, RIP. But this belt and the Embalmer completely solve our Chaos resistance. So the 50% to Chaos resistance during any Flask effect modifier comes from the Delirium Essence that I was saying you could craft the ring with as well. And you'll try to fracture that. Once you fracture that, you'll then take the belt over here and you will reforge Chaos. Only 100 vivid crystallized life force, so it's an incredibly consistent craft. You'll get tier 1 Chaos no problem. Ideally, you would want tier 1 Chaos, increased flash charges gained as that final suffix, and for the prefixes you would obviously want life, energy shield, I think, or evasion. Evasion is another good one. And then you want the craft of increased elemental damage with attack skills. I'm pretty sure that's the ideal belt for how I've set up the character. There's a couple of other belts that are runner-ups, but they just don't come with the same things, like the increased flask effect at the top there on the implicit. That raises our maximum resistances. It gives us free elemental resistances, about 12% additional elemental resistances. And this belt also helps us get away from the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule is a stepping stone, unique jewel that you can use because we're immune to damaging ailments, and this will help you cap your chaos resistance on your way to crafting your own micro distillery belt for the build. You don't have to do this, by the way. You really do not have to make this build. You could just stick with the Golden Rule, and then you could use something like the Darkness Enthroned with some jewels in it that have all elemental resistances and flat damage. You could use a Pyroshock clasp, though I hear there's a bug right now to where physical damage taken as is not bugged, but whenever you apply physical damage dealt as to an enemy, then something about the math formula gets a little funky and you actually end up taking more damage. Pyroshock clasp theoretically sounds like a really good idea. Word on the street is it's a little bugged. So as much as I wanted to use Pyroshock clasp, it didn't seem like a good idea with what I was hearing. Early on, you can use the Magnate if you don't have anything else, as it comes with elemental resistances plus to strength and 50% increased flash charges gained, which will be really useful for your Balbala early on when you're struggling for the passive points. Kind of compounded by the fact that Balbala should probably be your first purchase as a jewel, and that'll help you do the flash shenanigans that you see I'm doing here. And you're pretty pressed for passive points until you can pick up the Thread of Hope that I've included in the build. Another really interesting belt was Nivalius Inheritance. Sounded like a great idea, but the downside of the belt is just a little too great, so I would not recommend using this, but it just sounds so interesting. I had a viewer stop by and talk to me about this a little bit, and I was like, man, that sounds really cool. I want to use that so bad, but I can't quite make it fit. So, 2 runner-up belts, the Magnate and Darkness Enthroned. If you want to just slap something on and go with some good jewels that you got laying around, use the Darkness Enthroned. If you want to fit in an additional jewel, like for say you could use an Inspired Learning, or you could use a jewel like this. Chaos Dot multi, damage over time multi, damage with bows, increase maximum life. An important mod though I think is the gain 3 energy shield per enemy hit with attacks. Try to get a jewel with that at the very least, as we are hitting so often. I think that that's a really good recovery layer on top of Ghost Shroud for our energy shield. I don't think I talked to you about the boots. The boots are pretty simple. I got these from the Wumbo tree as well. Sorry, I got an itchy nose. And the implicits are for poison damage. The movement speed isn't really that important. It's an evasion base. You could use an armor evasion base, I guess, if you really want, but I think we value the evasion more for our avoidance layer. And you'll want an open suffix for 25 strength and intelligence, We're a little stretched thin for strength and intelligence due to life tap and malevolence. So we need that from somewhere. We're getting a little bit of strength from our Zoffgraft, and then we're getting the other bit of strength that we need from Kikuzaru and our boots. The intelligence isn't quite there. We're missing 2 intelligence and a little bit of strength. I think we're missing 4 strength and 2 intelligence in order to fully level malevolence and life tap. So small min-max to be made there. I think that's it. And for the gear, runner-up quiver that you could use while leveling is the Poised Prism. Runner-up placeholder boots that I was talking to you about before, the Blood Dance. They just come with an easy application of life regeneration, which you're kind of hurting for early on. Until you get your Kikuzaru anyways. You probably want to get rid of Blood Dance as soon as you get your Kikuzaru. You could put on the Despair to that Kikuzaru that I was talking about. Yep. I think that's the gear. For the flasks, increased duration implicit across all of them. 15% damage taken from hits is leached as life. Craft from the bench. All elemental resistances is important because we're kind of stretched on that. And then increased evasion rating. If you don't want the evasion rating here, there's another bench craft for flasks, which is regenerate 3% of life during flask effect. And that's another popular one that I like to include on my flasks a lot. My goodness, my nose is really bothering me. Ah! Make it stop. Holy allergies, Batman. It's like I got a whole pound of cat hair up my nose or something. So, I guess I should talk to you about the jewels too, because that's part of the gear. I already talked to you about the ideal rare jewel and the modifiers that you should be looking for on that. If you're looking for a suboptimal corrupted blood jewel, try to find one with knock enemies back on hit. I think an enemy that's being knocked back is one that's hitting you less often, and some of those scarier expedition monsters are the melee ones. Seriously though, this is pretty suboptimal corrupted blood jewel. It should be cheap. If it's not cheap, don't buy it. It's not that big of a deal. The other jewels are the Watcher's Eye for damaging ailments who inflict deal damage 12% faster while affected by malevolence, and chance to evade attack hits while affected by grace. You could also get a Watcher's Eye with the damage over time multiplier from malevolence, but that's going to be really expensive next to these other 2 modifiers, and I do think that these 2 modifiers are the better options. You're going to use a Balbala, Brutal Restraint, and that is what will make our flask setup work. I talked to you about those just a moment ago, and that is for the trader granted by Brutal Restraint here. You can see denoted service of Ikara and the Akara of Balbala. Balbala is the important word there, and it grants this keystone in radius. Flask charges every 5 seconds, and we increase that number, which is 4, by 25%, so that we get 5 flask charges every 5 seconds, and that completes the loop for our elemental flasks. Thread of Hope. You'll need a large Thread of Hope so that you can pick up all of these wonderful passive points. Large Cluster Jewel. 8 passives, increased chaos damage. Most important thing is Overwhelming Malice and Grim Oath. You could also get a little bit of intelligence here. That'd be a great way to solve that final 2 points of intelligence needed for malevolence on the Cluster Jewel. But this large Cluster Jewel is a little expensive. I think it cost me 1 Divine Orb. So on your way to this, just use a medium Cluster Jewel. The Critical Strike medium Cluster Jewel, to be exact, has the ability to roll Overwhelming Malice as well, and will help tide you over on your way to either buying or making your own large Cluster Jewel with Grim Oath and Overwhelming Malice. Overwhelming Malice will help you get rid of things in the build like Toxic Rain of Withering, which I was using while leveling to help me apply Wither more consistently. Or it can help you get rid of this Chaos Mastery chance when you inflict Withered to inflict up to 15 Withered debuffs instead. So you can get rid of that once you pick up Overwhelming Malice. Quick little honorable mention for the jewel section is inspired learning. You would allocate 1 point into infused, or if you're still using frenzy charges, you could put 2 points towards that. And that will satisfy inspired learning and grant you one of the monster's modifiers that you are slaying for 20 seconds. And they can stack, so it's pretty fun. I like using inspired learning whenever I can, but I think that the more sound option is just a rare jewel with those ideal modifiers. Before I move on to the skills, I want to talk to you about the path of building drop-down menu for the items. We've got the default, we've got the mid-game, and then we've got the end game. Default is incredibly similar to the end game, so not too many differences there, but yep. I imported my character a couple of times for you so that you could see the differences. Skills. Not too much has changed here since the last update, but I'm going to go over it all again just for consistency and convenience for you. Scourge Arrow of the Menace. We use Unbound Ailments, Greater Multiple Projectiles, Vicious Projectiles, Elemental Damage with Attacks, Deadly Ailments. You could get an Awakened version for all of these. Every single one of these you could get an Awakened Deadly Ailments, Awakened Elemental Damage with Attacks, Awakened Vicious Projectiles, Awakened Greater Multiple Projectiles. That one's really expensive. Awakened Unbound Ailments. My Castle Wars game finished. I've got to get back in there and AFK pronto. Purity of Elements, Grace, Malevolence, Flame Dash. That's our only movement skill, by the way. Caustic Arrow of Poison, Tornado Shot. This is one of our Manaforged setup links for Life Tap and Manaforged arrows, as you can see there. Storm Rain of the Conduit, Lightning Arrow of Electrocution, and Conflagration. I used to be using Scourge Arrow of the Menace right here, but we replaced Frenzy with Conflagration, and I think Conflagration fits better into this 6-link than Scourge Arrow of the Menace does. So we got rid of Frenzy because we're farming altars, like I've been saying. We slapped in Conflagration instead, and now Scourge Arrow of the Menace is down there in the boots next to Ensnaring Arrow. And the reason why I put in Conflagration is the tagline at the bottom there that you see. Explosion deals 50% more damage with hits and ailments. And then with 20% quality, that goes up to 80% more damage with hits and ailments. So it has a bad upfront attack damage percentage, which is 35%, and then it has a bad effectiveness of added damage. But it's got pretty good overlap. So I think that this is a single target decision, as I feel like I noticed a difference. I really do feel like I noticed a difference once I put on Conflagration. And the overlap is much better than I thought. I'm not really having to run around and activate any of the orbs if something's on top of me. They just kind of automatically activate due to my proximity. And it's a new skill! It's a new skill! I wanted to use one of the new skills. We couldn't use the thunderstorm thing or whatever because you're only allowed to self-cast that. So, Conflagration! I'm using it. Ensnaring Arrow and Scourge Arrow of the Menace. Now, Ensnaring Arrow, sorry, I almost said Scourge Arrow, is more of a debuff that we're applying to enemies. And the reason why we're using Ensnaring Arrow, unlike the previous renditions of Poison Manaforged arrows, is that we don't care about Pierce. We do not care about Pierce at all. All of our clear is handled by Scourge Arrow of the Menace, as it has built-in 100% Pierce for all of the arrows coming from that skill. And we've got two of them. We've got our main skill is Scourge Arrow of the Menace, which is proccing all of our Manaforged. And then we've got the second Scourge Arrow of the Menace attached to one of the Manaforged arrows supports. And that just fills up our screen with tons and tons of projectiles. Goes through every single enemy, applying our poisons very, very nicely. In our weapon swap, we're using Shield Charge. The Empower, I need to delete that. Enduring Cry, Life Tap, Urgent Orders. And then here's some of the stepping stones. I don't know how these got down here, but here's some of the stepping stones. Toxic Rain of the Withering. You'll use this as one of your Manaforged supports until you feel like you've got your Wither at a better place. Whether that is through Overwhelming Malice on one of your cluster jewels, or if you are using Withering Touch. I decided to go with Withering Touch because whenever you put Withering Touch next to Storm Rain of the Conduit and Lightning Arrow of Electrocution, you are applying Wither a lot. you are applying Wither a lot. So Withering Touch, a great support to replace Unbound Ailments when paired up next to Storm Raid of the Conduit and Lightning Arrow of Electrocution. Can't recommend it enough. Whenever you're struggling for damage in the campaign, you should probably be using Frenzy as one of those Manaforged arrows. At the end game, we won't be using Frenzy. Like I said, we'll replace it with Conflagration so that we can pick up additional Eater of Worlds altars without the downside of our Frenzy charges making us have 30% less defenses for each one. Let's do the Major God and Minor God real quick before we go over the passive tree. Major God, Soul of Lunaris or Soul of the Brine King if you feel like you're getting stunned too often. Soul of Rislatha, enemies you've hit recently have 50% reduced life regeneration rate. Another runner-up is the reduced reflected damage taken from Soul of Ugul before you get the awakened elemental damage with attack support. Soul of Gruthkul could be potentially useful if you're getting swarmed. Soul of Tukahama is useful for physical mitigation, as we are stationary whenever we cast our bow. And it comes with a little bit of regeneration as well, which recovery is always nice. But I'm going with Soul of Rislatha so that we can kill those expedition monsters as quickly as possible. Soul of Lunaris helps us gain a little bit of additional avoidance. The rest of the config, I'm sorry, I don't really care about. I'm not doing Pentacles with this build, I'm just farming expedition and whatnot. The passive trees! This is what the ideal passive tree looks like. This is the default. Got 2 missing passive points, so the character's at level 98. If you want some more damage, you could put in the 2 points down here for the poison duration, as that is the best damage that you're going to find for 2 passive points. If you want to do something different, the reason why I have Careful Conservationist and Replenishing Remedies is so that we can ignore the 50% reduced flash charges modifier on our maps. I usually don't get to ignore that mod whenever I'm playing a Balbala build, so I thought that I should balance the build for that. But if you don't care about that and you don't mind rolling past that mod, then you could put these points up here for an additional curse and pick up Despair as a ring implicit for Kikuzaru. You could pick up a little bit more movement speed, go back into the frenzy charges. There's a couple of options. I think it's up in the air. If you were to get the Foulborn Unnatural Instinct, you could potentially get a second Cluster Jewel, but that is such a egregious overinvestment that I would raise an eyebrow at you. You should probably use that jewel with another build that is able to benefit from it a little bit more. Or just sell it. That thing is crazy expensive. Crazy expensive jewel. But the passive tree is broken down into early leveling, my mid-game import, and then my end-game import. So, super simple breakdown. I think it explains itself. I gave you the step-by-step what each point was for, I think, in the last video, so I'll spare you from that this time. Important mastery for farming expedition is the monsters cannot block your attacks, as it's highly likely that those monsters are going to have 100% chance to block. And that would make you die. That would make you die pretty easily. Just so that you can see what conflagration overlap looks like. See all those? All those red explosions? And then if I walk over them. Is it like 5, 6, 7? 5 or 6 arrows. I feel like that's a really good overlap. While we're on the subject of skill behavior, let me talk to you about a few others. So, Ensnaring Arrow. This is only going to apply the debuff if you don't have any source of Pierce. We have Pierce in the build through things like Scourge Arrow of the Menace, and so we can clear screens really comfortably because of that skill. But Ensnaring Arrow will not be piercing through those packs. And so you may notice a little bit of the difference between the damage a front of a pack is taking versus the back of the pack. And so there will be some stragglers left over. You'll reapply your Scourge of the Menace. That'll proc your Manaforged arrows again. And that will include Ensnaring Arrow. You can have up to 3 snares, and the debuff is very, very nice. I am nearly confident that the increased projectile damage from attack hits being applied also helps out poison. To my understanding, seriously, I've done my best to read up on this. In the previous version of Poison Manaforged arrows, you didn't use Ensnaring because you had Pierce built in, and there may be some other tidbit of information that I'm overlooking in terms of why they didn't use Ensnaring Arrow, but for everything that I understand, it's because they had Pierce in the build, and the debuff would not have been applied unless it's meeting its final target. So I have included it in this version. We have Pierce already included through specific skill usage, and I think that the debuff is very powerful. If anybody knows to the contrary on whether or not the debuff actually helps out poison, I'm happy to be wrong. Please let me know down below in the comments. Now for the other skill behavior. Tornado Shot and Caustic Arrow of the Poison. You may have noticed when I was talking to you a little bit ago about Conflagration and the overlaps that it has, that I kept my mouse cursor close to my character. And that's for the overlap behavior. Tornado Shot and Caustic Arrow of the Poison. Uh-oh. Lag spike! Lag spike! I've got great internet, everybody. So, the further away the target, you see how those projectiles spread out? Look for green and like an icy white circle. Those are Tornado Shot and Caustic Arrow of the Poison being used. But the closer I am to my target, and the closer I keep my cursor to my character, all of those circles will stack on top of each other, increasing the amount of poisons applied. I think. I'm going off of a hunch here, and off of previous information that is, at this point, is it a year or two old? It's pretty old information, a couple leagues ago. But I think that the projectile behavior speaks for itself. It goes from being a spread out clump of circles to a very, very tightly knit stack of those circles. So that's all I wanted to let you know about the projectile behavior, and it is better to have monsters up in your face so that you can apply those poisons all the more quickly. Last but not least, I'm going to go over all sections of the Genesis tree, starting out with the most easily described. First up are the grafts from Growing Womb Gifts, Zoff Curation, Unguided Maturation, Modifier Tier Rating, 1 on both sides. Currency Item Womb. Head over towards Mutation Cultivation, through Flawed Seeds, while passing by Wild Growth, Fertile Genesis. You'll also want Prodigal Offspring. Shout out to Fubgun for that one, as well as the unique section that I'll go over in just a little bit. Mysterious Item Womb. I just used the Mysterious Womb Gifts for Ancient Womb Gifts and Lavish Womb Gifts whenever they drop. I've got 2 trees I want to talk to you for the Equipment Item Womb. One is for bows, the second is for boots, and I'm using a bow and wearing a pair of boots from both of those trees. So with the bow, we want triple elemental prefixes and then double dot multi-suffix. We're going to craft on one of those dot multi-suffixes. And then for the boots, we want an open suffix with spell suppression and a pretty good tier of resistance so that we can roll it over to lightning resistance through harvest crafting. If it has full suffixes, it'll most likely be due to life regeneration being that modifier taking up that spot. So you'll have to annul that off, and that is what I did with my boots. These had life regeneration on it before. I annulled it off and then put on the strength and intelligence that we need for our gym requirements. So this is the bow tree. You will want martial flesh, increased range weapons chance, increase the dex requirements, 85% less chance for intelligence and strength requirements. All these small nodes are for the chance to birth an additional item or increase the modifier tier rating, I think. Reroll values, keeping the best outcome, 50% chance for womb gifts to birth an additional item. Earth equipment has 80% reduced chance for attribute modifiers. Earth equipment has 80% reduced chance for speed modifiers. Chance to be fractured. Reroll sockets and links 150 times. Earth equipment has 80% reduced chance for physical modifiers. And it has a random amount of quality. This is the bow tree that I used to spawn this bow. It came pretty late game. I'm pretty sure it was from an item level 83 womb gift. And I may be blanking on one or two of the passives. I certainly didn't use any of these modifiers right here from Devoted Technique. And I'm near certain that I didn't use Devoted Zeal or anything down here. I certainly didn't make this ring from the womb gifts. I just bought it with the tier 1 accuracy fracture and catalyst it myself. But I bet you could make something similar from the womb gifts, so play around with the tree if you want to get any jewelry out of it. Let me show you the boots tree real quick. Let me get that set up. So the boots tree really isn't all that different. You just take a couple of points and move them around. Instead of increased ranged weapons chance, you now have increased boots chance. And you will move away from reduced speed chance. You'll pick that up over here, increase it instead. Then you want to increase the chance for life modifiers, which is a double-edged sword. You'll have to annul off life regeneration if it shows up on that suffix list. And then you want to keep reduced chance for attribute modifiers, as it's also a suffix, and you don't want that showing up on your items either, because you'll have to annul it off. So everything else, I'm pretty sure, stays the same. The reduced chance for physical modifiers could be spent in a different way, I'm sure, but I don't think I've ever actually changed it. And that's all I can say for the equipment item tree. So let's move on. The unique item tree, I would like to give credit to Fubgun for, as I watched his video, and I'm trying to target those big ticket items, and I think you should too. So path all the way up here for recessive genes. And then you have a choice between, which is it? I think Foulborn Gluttony or Extremely Foul. Extremely Foul will give you a chance for double Foulborn modifiers, which for Unnatural Instinct is like super, super valuable. Whereas Foulborn Gluttony is just going to increase your odds of not only getting more unique items, but more Foulborn uniques. So pick your poison there. You're going to want more chance for items to be belts, more chance for items to be jewels, and then you're going to block intelligence requirements, strength requirements, and dexterity requirements. If you're targeting something else, then feel free to get rid of these less chance modifiers. But if you want the jewels and if you want the belts, this is the best way to find them, through the ancient womb gifts, that is. That's it for the Genesis tree. Pretty simple. So there you go. Those are my final updates for Poison Manaforged Assassin. Sorry that the original plan with Poison Perfect Agony Kinetic Rain Assassin didn't work out. That's just kind of how it goes whenever you've got experimental ideas with new skills and a reworked Ascendancy, I guess. You got to be prepared for failure. And fail we certainly did. Had to scramble and put this build together. It's a throwback to Affliction League. So what? It's on a new Ascendancy, and I think it fits really well. I think Poison Manaforged Arrows is potentially a staple build for Assassin. Maybe not a League starter. Not quite confident on that angle, but I think it's definitely one of the intended builds that they had in mind for the All Damage Can Poison Ascendancy node. Now, if you tuned in for whenever I was crafting the belt for this build, I am so sorry. I am such an asshole. Oh my god. I was losing my mind. Something about me and fracturing orbs just do not get along. I've had a fracturing orb craft in the past where I had to spend like 14 fracturing orbs. And at a certain point, your mind starts to turn to mush as you tally up all of the thousands of chaos orbs that you've wasted trying to get this one single modifier isolated. Yeah, yeah, I definitely lost it a couple of times. Started spitting fire and venom in every single direction. So my heart goes out to you if you had to listen to me at all during that time. Not who I like to be, and I'm still constantly working on that part of myself. So where do I go from here? Well, I'm planning on making a new build. I want to play accuracy stacking Juggernaut with the new clause Foulborn, Hand of Thought and Motion, as per intelligence it gives you increased percentage accuracy, and then per amount of dexterity it also gives you flat lightning damage. So I'm going to dual wield those claws, and I'm thinking either Reeve, or if I can figure it out, slower projectiles spectral helix accuracy stacker is something that I've always wanted to do, but I'm not quite sure it's going to work out due to the investment or the opportunity cost of being both slower projectiles and accuracy. I might have to end up choosing one of those if I want either or to work. But who knows, right? You never know until you try, and those claws are incredibly enticing. Seriously, seriously powerful claws. If you haven't gotten yourself a pair yet, try to pick 2 up and start working on that accuracy stacker, because I think that's going to be a standout build this league. That's all I got for you guys. Thanks for tuning in. Like and subscribe. Leave me a comment. Peace out. Have fun. See you next time.